What happens when you smoke a brisket using only wood chunks in the Oklahoma Joe's Tahoma Auto-Feed Charcoal Smoker? We're gonna find out in this video, so let's get smoking. Welcome to the Smoke Lab, guys. I'm Steve Gow, and on this show, I do crazy barbecue experiments you would never do at home, so you can learn from my trial and error. The Oklahoma Joe's Tahoma Auto-Feed Charcoal Smoker. That's what we're playing with today. And notice charcoal is the key word here. You're supposed to use a mix of charcoal interspersed with a few wood chunks in this particular smoker. But what if we decided to break the rules and go all wood chunks? Would it even work? And if it did work, would it make our brisket smokier, similar to something that you might get on an offset smoker? Honestly, I have no idea whether this experiment is going to be a success or it's just going to be a disaster and my Tahoma lights on fire. But my hypothesis is this: assuming that this does work and the Tahoma can handle all wood, then I think that using all wood will give my brisket a smokier, darker bark and more smoke flavor. But we won't know until we try it, so let's test it. For this experiment, I'm starting with 2 choice grade briskets. First up, I'm keeping it simple with the control brisket, just a basic trim, nothing too fancy. Next, I'm slathering it with some soy sauce, not really as a binder per se, but more like adding liquid salt for that extra layer of umami goodness. Then comes a layer of coarse pepper, a sprinkle of kosher salt, and finally a dusting of this Oklahoma Joe's Carolina style barbecue rub, which is really nice, just finishing it off with a nice little coat. Now it's time to get my alligator loppers out to chop some cherry wood splits into small chunks. The smaller the better, guys. We're not making tiny wood chips here, but the chunks need to be small enough so that they properly feed in the Tahoma without jamming up the works. Now with the wood prepared, I'm carefully weighing out all of the charcoal and the wood for this control cook. I want to see if the all wood cook I'm doing tomorrow is going to use more or less fuel than adding charcoal and wood chunks. So I'm getting scientific about it and I'm weighing all of the fuel I'm using. I added roughly 35% wood chunks to the charcoal, about a 1:3 ratio, which I think is probably standard for what most folks probably do. Time to fire up the Tahoma. I added 2 fire starters, lit them up, closed the ashtray, and let it get going with the lid open for about 5 minutes. Then I placed 2 water pans on the bottom rack. I popped the brisket on the upper rack with the probe in it, and I set the Tahoma to 225 degrees Fahrenheit for the first 4 hours of the cook. And now we wait. For the next 4 hours, the Tahoma's puffing out some nice smoke, and even though we're only using 1/3 wood to charcoal, it's looking pretty good, which raises the question, do we even need to use more wood, let alone all wood? We're gonna find out soon enough. 4 hours later, the brisket is looking pretty decent. It's got a nice color and it's sitting at around 122 degrees internal. So I'm increasing the temperature to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And most importantly, I need to increase it to 300 degrees Fahrenheit to render the top of the fat cap. If I do it at too low a temperature, the fat cap is never gonna render down and give you that caramel, brown, yellowish consistency that is kind of sweet. You're just gonna get opaque fat, which is fine, but it just doesn't taste as good. 2 hours later at 300 degrees Fahrenheit, the brisket is probing around 165 to 170 degrees Fahrenheit. It's probably just coming out of the stall. It's sweated out a lot of moisture. And this is when I like to foil boat it and put it back on the smoker to finish. The foil boat is gonna keep everything nice and moist while we continue to work on rendering down that fat cap. 8 hours into the cook, the brisket is probing around 195 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's looking pretty darn good with a nice dark bark. I'm liking the look of it so far. So I'm removing it from the foil boat, I'm wrapping it in foil, and I'm placing it in my holding oven at 150 degrees for 18 hours, or that's what I would normally do, but in this video, I'm doing kind of an extra bonus experiment. Because I'm smoking the all wood brisket the next day, the control brisket has to hold for 2 days. It has to skip a day. So I'm gonna see if holding the control brisket for 2 days is gonna turn it into mush, or maybe it'll make it taste better. Okay, day 2, the experiment continues. Now it's time to trim and season the experimental brisket, just like the control brisket, no changes there. I'm trying to keep all the variables as close to the same as possible. What I am changing this time is I'm adding all wood. And yes, I mentioned that it's all wood, but to start with, I am adding 1 pound of charcoal just to make sure the Tahoma lights properly and gets a good charcoal base to burn the rest of the wood. After that though, all wood. Now with everything prepped and the hopper loaded with wood, I lit it up and I smoked the brisket at 225 degrees Fahrenheit for 4 hours. There's noticeably more smoke billowing out of the stack, as you can see here, which suggests that this brisket might come out smokier than the control brisket. Then it's up to 300 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours, then foil boating it once it hits around 175 degrees internal for another 2 hours, for 8 hours total until it reaches around 195 degrees internal. Now I did have to open the hopper every few hours to kind of tamp down the wood so it didn't get hung up. That's really important. And halfway through I had to add more wood because it seemed to be burning faster than the charcoal in the control test. Now once the brisket hit 195 degrees Fahrenheit, 8 hours in, I foiled it and I put it in the holding oven until the next day. So what does the all wood brisket look like the next day? Looks like this. Super dark, really nice color. Looks like it just came off an offset smoker, to be honest. And the control brisket, dark, but just a shade lighter than the all wood version, and it's got some brown coloring in there as well. And here we have the two briskets. Just at first glance, I'm sure you guys can already tell the all wood Tahoma brisket is a lot darker than the normal Tahoma brisket that we smoked with both charcoal and wood. The one that we smoked with all wood, super dark. I'm just gonna give each one a smell test right now. So I'll smell the normal brisket, the control brisket, if you will. Okay, I'm picking up a lot of good smoky notes on it. It's really well balanced. It's kind of campfire-y a little bit. It smells a lot like an offset smoker brisket does. A little bit less smoky though. Let's smell the all wood one now. Oh man, just at first sniff, it smells a lot smokier. It's got a lot more depth of those smoky flavors. There's more kind of flavor notes or scent notes. I'm picking up a lot of bacony, hickory, campfire, kind of licoricey type notes, whereas this one, it's kind of flat. It's just kind of smoky and it's there, but it's subdued. And this is really robust in its smoke flavor. So let's cut into the control brisket here first. I'm just gonna give it a slice right down the middle here. I always run out of cutting board space. I need, like, this is a large cutting board and I need one that is like 4 times bigger. Maybe I'll just buy one of those entire table surfaces, countertops from IKEA that's just pure wood. Okay, I'm gonna cut down here. It's really smooth. And the thing I did with this brisket, this is a little bit of a bonus experiment that I did in this video. I actually held this brisket for 2 days because, as you'll recall, this is the first brisket that I smoked, and I smoked it the day before I smoked this one because I only have one Tahoma. So this one has been holding for 2 days at 150 degrees Fahrenheit. I have never done that before, so we'll get to find out pretty soon whether that's even possible or whether this thing is just gonna fall apart. I'll give you guys a look here. It is super juicy. Whew. Really nice brisket. And it's not really falling apart. I've overcooked a lot of briskets in my life and I wouldn't call this one overcooked. This is really nice actually. It's got some nice rendering to the fat cap. You can see that yellowish consistency up there. There's a little bit of white underneath, but that's okay. We got some good rendering on there. Let's take a slice off the point first. Just like this. We'll put that to the side for burnt ends. And I'll make a couple slices here. That's 1 slice. 2 slices. 3 and 4 right in the middle of the point. This should be the best slice. I can already tell that the bark is really, really well rendered. Ooh. Ooh, so tender. See, that fat cap is rendered all the way down. That's gonna be absolutely delicious. I'm gonna pull this apart. Just pulls apart like nothing. Love it. Okay, let's get a barky piece here. Really good, really tender. This is a perfectly cooked brisket. The fat cap is perfectly rendered. I'm not getting a ton of smoke flavor on it though, to be honest. A little hint of smoke flavor, but it's not a ton. Not a ton at all. And I'm just gonna slice the rest of this guy. In terms of my little mini experiment in this video where I held this brisket for 2 days, it is a little bit more tender than my normal briskets, but I can tell that the muscle fibers are getting a little bit more dried out, but this is a totally passable brisket. No one would really notice the difference. So it just goes to show, if you guys want to hold your briskets for over 24 hours, no big deal. No big deal at all. The brisket's gonna be just fine. All right, let's try out a slice of the flat here. Now again, this has been holding for 24 hours and it's still not really falling apart until you pull it, and it just falls apart like nothing. So that is a perfectly cooked brisket to me. It has a little bit of consistency and texture and structure to it. It doesn't just crumble apart like it's pulled brisket. Okay, let's give this guy a taste. Perfect brisket, love it. Again though, the smoke flavor's pretty subdued. It's there, it's just subdued. It's better than a pellet grill, I'll put it that way, but not as good as an offset smoker. Okay, let's move on to the all wood brisket, but first I'm just gonna cleanse my palate, just so you guys know that I'm not gonna muddy the flavors. I'm gonna take a bite of this saltine cracker. Have a sip of water. Okay, so I've sort of reset my palate now, and I'm ready to taste this brisket, which it smells smoky, it looks smoky. Does it taste smoky? Probably. Okay, let's slice it right down the middle here. We'll open this guy up and I'll give you guys a look. It's a juicy looking brisket. Very similar to the last brisket, the control brisket. Let's pull it apart. Pulls apart very easily. Now let's give it a taste. Definitely smokier. It's more bacony. And it just has more of a depth of smoke flavor. It's got more flavor notes going on than the last one. Yeah, delicious. It's smoky, but I always say smoky, and that doesn't really describe all the flavors that go on with smoke flavor. So what I describe this as is it's got hickory, a little bit of black licorice. It's got some bacony notes to it. It's just very nicely smoked, a lot of depth of flavor. So way more smoky than the last brisket. This one is way more similar to the offset smoker briskets that I cook, probably identical to a lot of the offset smoker briskets that I cook, which is pretty awesome. Okay, I'm gonna take a slice of the flat here. So let's see how the flat turned out. Looks nice. Swing. Falls apart nice. Good texture, let's try the bark. Just a lot smokier. Same points as the last slice I had. Now, last thing, I just went off camera and I melted some butter, clarified butter. And what I like to do is every time I make a slice, I just go over it with a little bit of butter. And I do that for every slice. Just adds a little bit of extra flavor. And the brisket holds up a little bit better because it doesn't oxidize as quickly and get that dried out sheen to it. Okay, my original hypothesis for this video was that using all wood in the Tahoma instead of a mixture of charcoal and wood, using all wood would lead to a smokier flavored brisket. And I think I have supported that hypothesis with this experiment because the brisket that we smoked with all wood in the Tahoma was a lot smokier than the control brisket that we smoked with a mixture of wood and charcoal. And looking at the amount of fuel we used 16 pounds of charcoal and 5.5 pounds of wood for the control brisket, which works out to 21.5 pounds of fuel. And we used 23.5 pounds of wood in the all wood experiment. So roughly the same amount of fuel by weight, which is very interesting. And that is interesting to me because instead of using charcoal, which may or may not be more or less expensive depending on where you're from in the country, you could use all wood. If wood is really cheap in your area, it's a lot cheaper than charcoal. You could just use all wood on your Tahoma and save a lot of money and basically use the same amount of fuel by weight to cook a brisket or whatever you're cooking. So it may be cheaper depending on where you live to use all wood instead of a mixture of charcoal and wood, which adds a lot more versatility to using your Tahoma. Second point, I was kind of concerned about whether the Tahoma would be able to handle all wood because Oklahoma Joe's doesn't really advertise that this can handle just wood. It's a charcoal gravity smoker, and they have in their tutorials and their instruction videos how to add charcoal mixed with little chunks of wood, but they've never said anywhere that you can use all wood on this thing. But I think as long as you start with maybe a pound of charcoal briquettes, so about 18 briquettes, just to get it started, and then you pile on all the wood on top of that, you'll be fine. The thing is, you need to have the wood chunks small enough so that they feed naturally with gravity. You don't want them getting hung up. And even if they're really small chunks like the ones that I used in this video, I still highly recommend every few hours you open up that hopper and you poke them down and make sure there's no air pockets and they're not getting hung up, because at one point during this video they did get hung up and the fire didn't go out, but it automatically shut off because it wasn't sensing enough heat was going into the main chamber. So once I saw that that happened, I went outside, I tamped all of them down, and then all of the chunks sort of fell back down and it started working fine again. So if I had been diligent in every few hours tamping down all of the wood in the hopper, I would have had no issues. And that's a big point. It does work in the Tahoma. You can use all wood in the Tahoma, which I think is amazing. And it brings the results of the brisket a little bit closer, almost identical to what you would get in an offset smoker, which is absolutely amazing because you also get the convenience and the set and forget nature of the Tahoma. So that brings me to my final point. Does it make brisket smokier? Yes, it does make it smokier. It makes it taste more like a traditional offset smoker brisket. So that is totally awesome. And it makes the Tahoma a little bit better in my mind because you can squeeze out even more flavor from it, which separates it from a pellet grill where you barely get any smoke flavor. With the Tahoma, you can get offset smoker results and you can get the set and forget convenience of a pellet grill, but with a ton more flavor. What do you think, guys? Would you try using all wood in your Tahoma? Let me know in the comments section below. I will see you in the next video, and until next time, happy smoking.